Bob is attempting to represent Christian theology. He's acting as if all Christians actually agree with his theology, but they don't. Even St. Gregory Palamas, who is the one who crystallized essence-energy distinction, doesn't agree. He tells you that creating and providence are eternal energies of God. But yet Bob doesn't know that because he thinks...
The reality is that it is a complete contradiction to say on one hand that Allah is completely self-sufficient and independent of his creation, and in every respect, including in all of his attributes, and then to say that Allah is the most merciful, because mercy by definition requires a transaction between the mercy giver and the one who receives mercy. Christians do not have this problem because of the energy essence distinction. Now,
Gregory Palamas, in particular, extensively explained the concept of God's energia, leading to the conclusion that the energia of God is uncreated. The energia of God is eternal, distinct from God, yet also God in His glory. However, when Islam speaks of the attributes of Allah, Hello everyone. In this video debate, we will discuss the essence of God and the energy of God. This topic arises from the fact that Islam rejects the idea that the Word of God descended and became a human named Jesus Christ. Yet they accept the idea that the Word of God descended and became an inanimate object called the Qur'an. Let us take a moment to listen to this debate.
Go ahead, Bob.
Right. So Muslims are making a claim that Allah can't enter into his creation. But then they're saying that the Qur'an is really the speech of Allah. Now, then they say, Muslims say, that Allah, that something that is created is not like Allah or his attributes. But then they say that their recitation of the Quran is created. This is an irrational contradiction. You can't maintain two positions in conflict like that. Whatever my failings are in my knowledge of how Gregory defines the energy essence distinction, which is a red herring to the point of whether there are irrationalities to Islamic theology and whether God can enter into his creation, is the key point. If you're saying, ladies and gentlemen, that nothing that God creates is like God, but then you're saying that the recitation of the Quran is like the speech of God, you've contradicted yourself. And I'd like you to address that point.
Bob, do all Christians agree with you on the essence-energy distinction?
So are you going to answer my point?
Answer the question, because
you're not answering my question, but you're demanding that I answer yours.
You made a claim. You keep talking
Jake,
about...
you're literally demanding I answer your question when you're not answering my question.
Christians versus Muslims.
Are you saying that all Muslims agree about the body parts of Allah?
All Christians agree with you on the essence-energy
Okay, no, of course not.
Okay, so why are you asking?
But do all Muslims agree about the body parts of Allah being real?
Okay, so
wait. Do the Ash'ari agree with the Salafi about the body parts of Allah?
Give me 1 minute.
Jake, answer that question. Answer that question, because you ask questions, but you don't answer them.
Let me talk.
Within Islam, there is a group called the Ash'ariya, which asserts that the speech of Allah, Kalam Allah, is eternal. They condemn other Islamic groups as disbelievers, kafir, if they claim that the Quran, as the speech of Allah, is created, for example, the Mu'tazila group. Similarly, within Islam, there are groups that firmly believe Allah has physical attributes, such as hands and feet, in His essence, while others interpret these descriptions as metaphorical. Perhaps it is because of these various doctrinal differences within Islam that Jake avoided answering Mr. Bob's question. Instead, Jake deflected the conversation by stating that not all Christians believe in the doctrine of God's energy. Perhaps I can briefly explain the difference between the essence and energy of God in the teachings of the Eastern Church before we continue this debate. Discussing the essence, or Dzatullah in Arabic, of God involves questioning what is God. However, questioning the what of God's existence means we are delving into the essence or Dzat of God, not His personhood. If we were to question the personhood of God, then the appropriate question would be, who is God? In addition to asking what, the essence of God, and who, the personhood of God, our discussion about the Creator also involves asking how, In other words, how God operates, how he is present in the world, and how he relates to creation. When discussing the how of God, we delve into his mode of operation, his presence in creation, and the manifestation of his divine power. This is where we talk about God's energy, which can manifest as the radiance of his glory emanating from his essence. Thus, the essence and the energy of God are distinguished, though they cannot be separated.
The matter is, he knows that not all Christians actually agree on the essence energy distinction. As a matter of fact, the Catholics don't. They don't agree on it. The majority don't actually agree on it. Also, the fact of the matter, him saying that it's incoherent to state that God could be a creator without creation. Well, let's listen to Saint Athanasius himself. He said, and a man may be made or called maker, though the works are not yet. But father he cannot be called, nor can he be unless a son exists. And if they curiously inquire why God, like Bob here, though always with the power to make, does not always make, though this also be the presumption of madmen, which is Bob, he's a madman right now. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor, or who shall say to the formed, to the potter, why did you make me thus? However, not to leave even a weak argument, they must be told that although God always had the power to make, yet the things originated had not the power of being eternal. So the fact of the matter is, Saint Athanasius says that you can be a creator without creation.
No, Athanasius did not say that. The quote actually said that God has the power to be the creator. And I don't deny that. But to be a creator, you actually have to create. Now this is further. Now notice that Jake avoided my issue completely about the Quran. And the reason why it is an issue is because the hadiths state in Sahih Muslim 804, recite the Quran, for on the day of resurrection it will come as an intercessor for those who recite it. So the speech of Allah will come before Allah and intercede to Allah for those that recite it. And what's the Muslim understanding of the fact that the hadiths actually say the Quran? Not the action of recitation, doesn't say that here. It says the Quran will come as an intercessor. But an intercessor is personable, and the one you're interceding to is personable, so the attribute of Allah is talking to Allah himself. That's a contradiction to Islamic theology.
Ready?
Yes, of course. It indeed becomes contradictory because Islam has not yet fully resolved whether the eternal word of Allah is Allah himself or not. Especially since Bob mentioned that the word of Allah is personal, because a hadith states that the word of Allah communicates with Allah. However, Muslims reject the idea that the word of Allah is Allah. Islam should revisit this issue and come to a clear conclusion on whether the eternal word of Allah is Allah himself or not, so their followers are not confused when answering questions, like Jake, who avoided answering Bob's question. In the 7th century, the Ash'ari group had already deliberated on this matter. Today, Muslims should gather and discuss it again, firmly deciding whether the eternal word of Allah is Allah or not. For us Christians, we firmly believe in what the Apostle John taught, that the Word of God is God, who came down to earth and took on human form as Jesus Christ. We are not confused when asked whether Jesus is God or not. It is the Muslims who seem confused when asked whether the eternal word of Allah is Allah or a created being.
Okay, so again, what I'm demonstrating here is Bob doesn't understand Christian theology. I have to teach him.
So we're just having two separate conversations then.
I have to teach him what St. Athanasius said. I have to teach him what St. Gregory Palamas says. Now, the incoherence is not in Islamic theology. The incoherence is within Bob. And don't worry, for the Christians watching, I'm not going to put it on Christian theology. Why? Because I can actually read Palamas myself and he understands the point. Just as St. Athanasius did when he said that God can be a maker or creator in the sense that he has the ability to create, which is exactly what Muslims say. The act of creating itself has a beginning in time. Those are two different things from the ability to create and the expression of the attribute, which is what Muslims have always said, and you just don't understand it, Bob. So maybe you've been talking to the wrong people, or maybe you don't understand Islamic theology.
Okay, ready? The reality is that it is a complete contradiction to say on one hand that Allah is completely self-sufficient and independent of his creation, and in every respect, including in all of his attributes, and then to say that Allah is the most merciful. Because mercy by definition requires a transaction between the mercy giver and the one who receives mercy. Christians do not have this problem because of the energy essence distinction. Now, we're having two separate conversations here. Jake is no longer engaging with the arguments that I'm making. And the reason for that is because he doesn't want to defend the contradiction of saying that the Qur'an is the speech of Allah, but then having to deal with a source that says the speech of Allah intercedes to Allah for the believer. Instead, he has to reinterpret the hadith and call it the deeds.
No, what I'm actually doing is I'm showing that Bob is attempting to represent Christian theology. Hold on a second, man. You had your turn to talk, please.
Oh, I'll put it on screen.
So,
I'll put it on screen.
Bob is attempting to represent Christian theology. He's acting as if all Christians actually agree with his theology, but they don't. Even St. Gregory Palamas, who is the one who crystallized essence-energy distinction, doesn't agree. He tells you that creating and providence are eternal energies of God. But yet Bob doesn't know that because he thinks the energies of God are limited to God's action. He couldn't even answer the question as to whether or not there are eternal energies. Imagine that. Bob came here representing essence energy distinction and doesn't know if there are energies that are eternal. I want everybody to witness this, and we'll go to the experts to see whether or not Bob is so inadequate that he doesn't understand the own position that he's representing.
In ancient Eastern Christianity, starting from the early church fathers such as Irenaeus, moving on to Polycarp, and also Dionysius, discussions about the energy of God were prominent. Gregory Palamas, in particular, extensively explained the concept of God's energia, leading to the conclusion that the energia of God is uncreated. The energia of God is eternal, distinct from God, yet also God in his glory. However, when Islam speaks of the attributes of Allah, it hesitates to assert that these attributes are Allah himself. Let us delve deeper into the concept of God's energy from the Christian perspective. If, in his essence, God is incomprehensible to humanity, and humans can only understand God's existence through his attributes, then through his energy, humans can experience the presence of God. The Bible teaches about divine energy in the following way. No one has ever seen God. John 1:18. No one knows the Father. Matthew 11:27. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God! How unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. Romans 11:33. No one knows what is in the mind of God. 1 Corinthians 2:11. Who dwells in unapproachable light, whom no one has seen or can see. 1 Timothy 6:16. These verses explain that God has never been seen, cannot be known, is unsearchable, unfathomable, and incomprehensible. In short, they reveal that God's essence is entirely beyond human understanding. God is so transcendent and mysterious that such descriptions attempt to articulate his nature. However, other verses in the Bible provide a different perspective. He is not far from any one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. Acts 17:27-28. What may be known about God is plain to them. his eternal power and divine nature being understood from what has been made. Romans 1:19-20. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. Isaiah 6:3. These verses seem to contradict the earlier ones, as they describe God as near to humanity, evident in his works, and his glory filling the entire earth, which means that the earth is filled with his presence. Why do these descriptions of God appear contradictory? They are not contradictions, but rather two distinct ways in which God manifests his presence. The earlier verses describe God in his own essence, his eternal divinity and power which humans cannot comprehend. The latter verses describe God's presence among his creation, in humanity's life, motion, and being, in his works in nature and the whole earth, manifested as glory, which humans can perceive. This glory being present in creation is the result of God's activities. Since God's acts of creation manifest his glory, glory and God's actions are inseparable. Thus, the verses about God's incomprehensibility refer to his essence, which humans cannot grasp, while the verses about his presence in the world refer to his actions or energia. Orthodox Christian theology distinguishes between the divine essence and the divine energy. The divine essence is God's presence in and of himself, while the divine energy is God's presence in his creation, his actions external to his essence. Both, however, are true manifestations of God. The divine energy is not something created by God, but rather the uncreated energy that flows from his essence. While humanity cannot experience God in his essence, it can encounter him through his energy or glory, as evidenced by the Bible verses above. This is why Orthodox Christianity firmly differentiates between the divine essence and the divine energy.